Welcome to the GovForward multi-cloud webinar series brought to you by Caresoft and Government Executive Media Group. I'm James Hansen, the Vice President and Publisher of NextGov, the Federal Technology News Division of Government Executive Media Group. Through this series, we're featuring more than 30 technology experts covering virtually all facets of cloud security. These FedRAMP marketplace and multi-cloud technology thought leaders will highlight how their solutions enable agencies to address network security, data, and IT modernization challenges. You can see the full schedule of programs along with hundreds of related resources at caresoft.com/govforward. And now I hope you enjoy today's webinar.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan Pacchini, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Acquia. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webcast, Digital Transformation and the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act, presented by Acquia and Caresoft. This event is part of the GovForward multi-cloud series. Bringing your agency's digital footprint into the 21st century has never been more important. Online service delivery and digital citizen engagement in a time of social distancing creates unique challenges and new opportunities. Accelerating digital transformation, improving accessibility, and modernizing internal digital services are no longer a choice, but an imperative even for the public sector. We'll be discussing how digital leaders on the front line are using the 21st Century IDEA Act and other digital guidelines to address today's increasingly important role of modernizing digital government. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of the platform, you'll find several icons, including the Q&A tab, which allows you to ask a question. We'll have a subject matter expert fielding your questions live in the chat, so feel free to submit questions at any point along the way. If you experience any technical difficulties, just click on the help icon, and a member of our support team will assist you. Joining us today, we're very excited, we have Tarazia Martin. Tarazia Martin is a senior government leader with over 20 years of strategic, technology, and management expertise. This is a long intro because it's well-deserved. She has served in pivotal roles within the government sector throughout the years, such as Chief Information Officer, Strategic Human Capital Plan Director, Program Manager, as well as IT Acquisition Director and Networks and Data Center Operations Director at Treasury and at DHS. She has served across multiple federal market sectors, such as IRS, Treasury, GSA, DHS, U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services Agency, Office of the Director, National Intelligence, and the Central Intelligence Agency. Welcome, Tarazia. We're so excited to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely. So why don't we go ahead and just dive right in, Tarazia. I would love your input on a few questions just to guide government leaders as they navigate the new digital landscape. So maybe we can start with your take on the 21st Century IDEA and its impact on digital government.
Well, the 21st Century IDEA, I think, was released in 2018, if I recall. Lots of information in there about how to move toward a more digitized government. Specifically around website development and ensuring consistent content across government agencies. There's a lot that's been done in that arena, but I think in light of, I hate to bring this up, but in light of where we are with COVID right now, it's sort of a trigger for us, more of a trigger than maybe we anticipated. When the act was approved, there was a set of timelines associated with it for website development, for making sure all the content was consistent, making sure we were more focused on the citizenry. But I think now more than ever, we have to move toward that quicker than probably we wanted to. I think the COVID trigger has caused us to look at government very differently in terms of how we talk, meet, and deal with our customers. Specifically, when you look at website interactions, many of them are transactional in nature. Now we need to move toward more of an intimate type of communication with them through technology and different tools. So that's sort of a summary of how I see it.
Thank you for that. And you already kind of touched on one of the things that was top of mind for me, which is just the overarching reliance on digital as the primary channel to communicate with your constituents. So can you talk a little bit about what the shift has looked like for you over the course of the last maybe 6 or 12 or 18 months, as that timeline has been expedited? You had a plan 18 months ago, and now you have that plan has changed to be kind of more reliant on digital. So do you want to elaborate on how your agency has become more reliant on digital?
Well, HUD has been, I think, has been progressive in their thinking about how to deal with the public as it relates to public housing. Many of their public housing programs are really allocated to state level communications with our customers. And so a lot of the work happens there. And so it is a brick and mortar model, right? Come in, make an appointment, let's talk, let's do our thing together. We'll fill out tons of paper. We'll move that paper from desk to desk to desk. So we're rethinking many of those things now because we have to. I'm not sure of the real specifics because we haven't really had a lot of dialogue since the COVID experience. But what I would say before that is that we were systematically moving toward that model in a cost efficiency opportunity thought process, but also just more efficient communications with the customers. Because what happens with paper, everyone knows this, but errors sort of permeate, right? Every time you move a piece of paper from desk to desk and you're sort of communicating with that paper in some sort of brick and mortar way, it sort of creates more and more errors and less efficiency. So I think we're moving in that way now, and I think a lot of the civilian agencies are. But I think now it's just going to be an impetus for change, and it's already here. That's what I think is happening now.
No, that's great, and I think that's. It sounds like you guys you were an innovator in terms of taking those first few steps to transition from paper to a digital engagement model with your customers. Can you give the folks who are going to be listening to this broadcast just what you see as some of the most common obstacles in making that transition? And maybe, what advice do you have to kind of overcome some of those obstacles to be digital first and how you engage with your customers?
Wow, that's a really great question. So I think
the
kudos to you for that great question. But I think that the biggest hurdle we've always had with technology, and not just about where I am with HUD, but overall, has been around recognizing the cultural dynamics. And I'll talk about culture for generations because I think it's the biggest impediment we see. People are used to doing things the same way all the time. And most of us, including me, are creatures of habit. And if we're used to doing our work the same way, there's the same business process, you name it, we're going to follow that process until we're told differently. And then once we're told differently, we're still going to try to follow that old process. So I think when it comes to transformational things and technology evolution and maturity, I think you have to really dive deep into how the culture has been established to perform their work, and really, really dive into how do you take those processes and make it easier for them to first understand and then to adopt, because it takes quite a while. And I think that what we've seen in government is there was the eGov Act of, 2000, and now we've got this IDEA Act, and we have all these things about digitizing and changing the government domain, but we continue to sort of have the challenges about moving forward perhaps as quickly or as transformationally as we can. So I think culture is a big part of one of the challenges we face. But I also think there's so many types of technology available that people are overwhelmed. We hear, there's AI, there's blockchain, there's this, that, and the other, all these great tools. And then not to mention RPA, people are like, well, I can do this. It's easy. Let's do it. And then we start these big, huge projects. And many times they fall on their face because they become overwhelming and daunting. And so I say, if you're going to do it incrementally. I'm a big fan of Scrum and looking at things sort of in components and moving them forward. But I think that we have to look at, again, culture and how we adopt and adapt within each organization, because they're all different. There's not one government, there is one government concept, but everyone sort of does their work differently. And then I think the other thing is figuring out the right technology to transform the business process to move toward a more digitized environment.
Okay, if you're okay with it, Tarazia, you unpacked a lot of amazing concepts there. I'd like to dig into just a few of them as it relates to HUD and your broad experience and maybe some of your specific experience at HUD. You talked about the idea of increments and evolving your digital experience. How does your agency prioritize increments? How do you think about prioritizing the increments in your digital transformation to best serve your customers, given that there's so many different things you could do? Can you talk a little bit about your process as it
Yeah.
relates to the increments?
There's so many different processes, but I think one of the things that we've learned, and I'm not speaking directly as, for HUD, but what I'd say is we've seen this across government writ large, is that it's actually sort of thinking about technology differently. Many times and over the years, we think technology belongs to that IT function over there. The CIO owns it. Let them go do their thing. They're going to put in a wonderful data center and networks, and it's going to be great. But when it comes to data and the application layer and really dealing with the content and the capabilities for the business owners and users to use, I think that is where we've sort of had to flip the switch a little bit and get the business owners to help drive some of those changes, particularly with RPA. I mean, there's such an opportunity there to synergize and to really get the business representatives at the table and help them drive the change they want to see and have us enable it with these great tools. But if you start with the tools first and try to drive it tool-wise first, you sort of lose the audience in many ways, and they get discouraged because they're not technologists and they don't want to be. They just want to do their jobs more efficiently. How can we help them? So I think that's one way we've seen is really getting sort of integrated product teams together. They call them different things, but sort of integrated teams that can work together with business owners, your security representatives, your IT experts, to sort of work together to create an outcome and be it an incremental outcome. It doesn't have to be the big shebang, right? But it could be smaller components of value-added capability that you can scale and grow on. That's one way I think we've tried to look at it. And lastly, to your great question, I think recognizing where your agency is or your function is in terms of their mission goals. If housing is your mission goal, then you ought to be looking at housing processes and efficiencies there and prioritizing your work based on that, and which I think most of the agencies are doing.
Great. Thank you for that, Tarazia. It's really kind of inspiring to think about the business owners thinking about the constituents and you being a true partner to them to use technology to enable what your customers really want and involving them in the process. And I think, just in being in digital for almost 15 years now, one of the things that is so challenging is just the myriad of technologies and the different things that you can do, and always starting with the constituent outcome and the business outcome that you're trying to drive, and being a partner and enabling that outcome and prioritizing on that is just, I think is just an amazing way to approach how you run digital and the experience at your agency. Okay, so I want to unpack another thing, because like I said, you put a lot in that first response. Let's talk about culture. Let's talk about the cultural change, and just maybe some insights that you have within HUD around both and how you've used cultural insights to inform your digital strategy for the constituents. But I'd imagine it's also getting the traditional brick and mortar, the folks who work for the agency, to be open to the change in process through technology. So can you kind of talk about how you navigated the culture with the workers as well as with the customers, and maybe some key insights there?
Well, I would say that one of the biggest opportunities we saw at HUD, and I've seen it at other agencies too, is when you're bringing in new thinking. And I don't think it's about age. People say it's the X and Y's and the other generational things, which are factors as well. But when you're talking about bringing in people with different thought processes into a culture that's embedded, and you can hear them. You've got to be able to hear them and not ostracize them because they see the world differently. But if you can actually hear those ideas and bring them to the table and have an open dialogue about change and positive change, and getting the naysayers to see that, hey, that maybe this might work, maybe we can be better at what we do. I think those kinds of forums or opportunities where you can have even a facilitator just kind of talk about, start with the weather if you'd like, but then build yourself into a conversation about what can we do to be more effective with our customers? What can we do to be more, increase our timelines and our productivity around delivery of services. And when you can open that dialogue and you can talk to someone from X or Y or Z generation, with someone who's been at another agency or who has been in the commercial sector, who has worked for a technology company, and you bring them into the fold to have the dialogue, that's when you start to see real change. Because then the idea really happens. Speaking of ideas, the idea really happens, right? And then people can sort of manifest around that and move themselves toward a different thought process and a different culture. So that's one thing that we've done, is we've tried to kind of integrate the dialogue across different domains, including within the business areas of HUD. And like most agencies, there's silos, right? So how do you look at it horizontally and really look at a challenge as maybe a horizontal result versus a vertical result? And that changes the dynamic as well. So different techniques, I think, can feed into that. But you have to be willing to try and not just throw out the ones that have been there forever and bring in all new thinking, because legacy means something, right? The history builds upon something that is valuable, and you can learn from it. And I think that's all part of building that right sort of puzzle of cultural dynamic, if that makes sense.
It does. I think what I was hearing you say is that, it's a blend of thinking to get to the best outcome.
Yeah.
And having an open dialogue around making sure that the legacy thinking is heard and acknowledged, because there's insight there from history, as well as bringing in the new voices to help them realize the possibility and maybe some hurdles that they might have to get to what the next generation of experience, which is going to be best for the agency, which is going to be best for the constituents is. And that combination of blending those two cultural elements is a recipe to make progress and to keep true to the mission of the agency. Is that kind of?
Yep. Well
okay.
said. Well,
okay, great. Can I guess on that front, and this might I think it's along the same lines, is can you maybe talk about some of the organizational changes that need to take place to deliver on a kind of digital first experience? How are some of the roles changing internally for your agency, and what do you think that some of the major organizational changes could look like theoretically, not just maybe for HUD, but generally to adapt to the new landscape?
Well, I think, and this may be radical for those who are locked into the old way, but I think we have an opportunity to relook at everything. In spite of the negative things that COVID has created in our world, which is just horrific. What it's caused the government, in my opinion, to do is to really step back and look at how can we become more effective, because of not just the risk we've seen with this issue, but also with the opportunity to communicate more effectively and to work, remotely alone. Remote working and teleworking is a game changer for us. Everyone's used to going to that, DC building and doing what they do every day and having their coffee over at the Starbucks, and, the routine continues, right? So now what do we do differently and still cohese and work together to produce a result? So again, back to culture, but how do you create the right dynamic for team collaboration with the right technology? Zoom being one, GoToMeeting, you name whatever it is. But how do you create that dynamic so that you can actually get that horizontal communication going across the various disciplines in an organization? I think once we can sort of get our heads around the fact that this is going to be the new normal, an overused term these days, but the new normal is remotely working. How do you collaborate with a meeting of 100 people? How do you really collaborate, not just have a video and you can see each other and you're smiling and then you go back and do your laundry or whatever, but how do you actually collaborate truly at a deep level and really get change to happen? And I think that's the dilemma we face right now, and not just for HUD, across the government, actually across the world. I think it's a big dynamic that we've got to figure out how we can make it real again, tangible again. And then how do you build a trust model? Because the government, I've seen the pendulum swing over the years, right? But one of the things we've done is we've been sort of hesitant to do a lot of teleworking. Well, we can't trust you. You're going to work at home. What are you going to be doing with your time? Are you going to be effective, efficient? How do I track you? How do I monitor you? And I think those kinds of tools and technologies, without being too big brothery, have to be really thought through to build a trust with the employee, with our consultants that work with us every day, to build the outcomes that we need more desperately now than ever. So I think we've got a lot ahead of us in terms of figuring all of that out. Did that answer your question, sort of?
It did, and I need to get to the next level. So, so that was great. And I guess along those lines, one of the questions, as we adapt to that, like you've said, overused word, phrase of new normal, how do we make a meaningful connection with what we have right now, which is primarily digital channels? And so the theme that we hear over and over again, both in government and in commercial sectors, is it's a combination of content and data. So for example, a lot of the content for most organizations was, a good portion of it, let's say, was delivered via a brick and mortar. And there were check boxes that were done online, or certain processes that were done online. And the data was often stored in some of our employees' heads, because they knew the details about the constituents that they served.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious for you, how you're thinking about how you're investing in content and data, and how that's changed with the new normal. Maybe you want to kind of talk about each of those buckets, or if you want to talk about them together as a way to create the meaningful connections.
Well, along with how we started the conversation, your great question about the IDEA Act. When you think about just even website communication or website transactions, behind all of those technologies should be some sort of data structure, right? Mm-hmm. Data governance has to be there, data management has to be there, your data models have to be there. Hopefully you have an enterprise architecture of some kind that can help you manage that information and that data in a way that is effective and measurable and produces a result. With the state of grace of where we are right now, we have no other choice but to do that. And I think many of our agencies have, I don't want to share my age, but let me tell you, we've been doing data since my days at the IRS 100,000 years ago, and we still don't seem to have it right. And we try these different ways of doing it. There have been some agencies that have been very effective at building some of the components of that. But I'm an old school girl, and I actually think, starting with an enterprise architecture framework. I'm not saying you have to, invest in every possible model that there is and go broke trying, but even a simple framework around how to manage the most important data that you manage for your constituents or for your agency is so important because of where we are right now. And if you don't have that data accessible to you, real-time, measurable, traceable, reportable, ability to monitor, you're going to be in a world of hurt. How do you connect if you don't have the information that your constituents or customers need? And I don't mean part of the data, I mean the whole profile about that particular customer or issue or project. And so I'm a big believer in data management, data governance, and actually doing it right. So I know HUD is moving toward that direction very strongly. I believe a lot of other agencies are too. So I think we're going to get there, and hopefully sooner than later, because we have to, right? Your other comment or question was around content, right? So in terms of content, it's the same dynamic, it's the same story. At the root of content is your data and your story and your information. But as it relates to website development and, getting that content right to tell that story correctly so that person who's clicking on your website can only do, I don't know, one click, get what they want, whatever, as opposed to 20 clicks and 20 minutes later, you've lost them. How do you create that in a real-time, effective, simple, easy way? And I think that gives us an opportunity for creativity beyond belief. I look at different websites, I'm sure you too, and you see some of the thought process in terms of creating the way the data and the content are structured. It can take you right to a nap or it can alert you and excite you and get you motivated to keep searching or looking or whatever. And I think that's the science of it. That's the beauty of being able to do that via websites and communication through digital technologies. So that's my 2 cents on that. I hope that's helpful.
No, that is great. Things obviously, of course, it seems to be the theme. You sparked a few different ideas from each of your answers, so let's roll with that.
Okay.
I think one of the things you touched on, and I think, given your expertise across a variety of functions and agencies, but this theme of enterprise architecture seems to be coming back to the forefront again.
Yes.
After it's gone in cycles about the importance of it, it's kind of fallen behind the scenes and it comes back and fallen behind the scenes and comes back. And I think anything that has value tends to resurface over and over again. And for folks maybe who are, at the beginning of a digital transformation or starting to plan a digital transformation or have a digital transformation forced on them because of COVID, can you talk just a little bit about the broad strokes, how organizations should be thinking about enterprise architecture? What are the primary considerations in this new world of data and content and myriad of technologies? Like, we know that the days of, you can't go to one software vendor for most of what you need to do. So that brings enterprise architecture to the forefront. This is a long-winded way of asking the question, but can you kind of just touch on the importance of enterprise architecture and some of the broad strokes around getting started with the right type of enterprise architecture?
Sure. Again, I don't know. I grew up in my first real gig, technology gig was at the IRS, and learned the sort of systems engineering methodology of how you create and manage information. And that is basically EA. And so that's sort of where I come from. Many of the new schools of thought are coming from different vantage points on that, but it all comes back to, I think, a plan, a plan, and an ability to integrate the components that would allow you to deliver the results of that plan. Call it EA, it's a great term for it, but if you actually use the enterprise architecture framework, and there's so many permeations of this now, DoD has a view of it, different organizations use it differently, but it all comes back to a plan and the integration of those components to deliver a result. So bottom line is, I think that you've got to actually have an EA structure in this day and time more than ever, because you don't have the ability to walk down the hall. You may not have the ability as readily to walk down the hall and say, hey Joe, I need you to help me create this app, or I need you to modify the network because we got this issue going on right now. I've got a security concern over here, and hey Joe, that model may be obsolete at this point. And so if you do not have a framework that shows where your security structure is and how it enables your apps and how it enables your network, how it enables all of the capabilities in your environment to secure it safely, if you don't have a data structure that tells you where your information and data are, for you to manage it effectively and access it properly with the right access controls. If you don't know where your apps are, hello. If you don't know what they're doing, if there's no integration points between the data, the story goes on and on and on. If you don't have those components in a sort of virtual digital world, you're really going to be in a disadvantage.
Yep.
Not just against enemies that may come to try to thwart us, but also against being able to meet your customers' requirements and needs. So I'm a big believer in EA, and I think that it is really where agencies have to maybe step back for a moment and think about how do you get there without throwing everything away to build it, but in a balanced way where the apps and your information can still progress and proceed with some of these other different capabilities like ITIL and even your data and your application services come into play. But it's got to be an integrated way where you can do it systematically. And don't forget the word plan. Did I say plan? Let me say plan. You got a plan.
And how do you manage, I guess, maybe some guidance too for folks who are looking at their enterprise architecture because they need to do more in digital and there might be adopting new technologies. The other piece of that is obviously the business owners who see new ideas in the market, and often if you're not, they can come back to you at a late stage and say, and you're like, well, this doesn't fit into our bigger plan. So can you talk about the relationship and how you manage that with the business owners to make sure that it's cohesive in terms of enabling them to do what they need, but also not breaking that enterprise architecture or having snowflakes that would create complexity?
Well, again, I alluded to this earlier. I believe that the business has to drive change. It's not the technologists necessarily, because there's always a new technology, every day, something new to try. But inside the enterprise architecture framework is something called the business reference model. And the business reference model actually defines the business need and the business requirement in a way where technologies, be it data, network, whatever it is that's enabling that data to get to where it needs to be for the said process or function, gets to. And so if the business reference model is created in a way where your business owners actually own and drive and manage that piece, they will then turn on those technology pieces along the journey to get to the result. So the business plays a critical role in EA because without them, you only have technology. What can you do with it without data or content, right? Not much. Right. So I think that's really critical, is having the business drive, where they want to be, starting with mission, but then, starting with vision and then driving it toward mission capabilities and allowing those capabilities to be enabled by a technology or multiple technologies. So that's the shift I see, is having the business drive. Without them, you have no IT. Without IT, the business may end up just doing paper processes, which is where we've been many moons ago. So I see it as a critical sort of, I'll call it the tipping point, is that the business has to drive. And without it, it's tool time all day long.
Yep. Great. Thank you for that. Going back to the IDEA Act, I had another question. Obviously, there are parameters around the way new digital experiences need to be delivered, especially websites. That in some ways, you can see it being conflicting with the additional requirements, even though it's good, with the need to create more digital experiences as a result of the transition to online. So can you talk a little bit about, how you're balancing the need to kind of create more with digital with some of the parameters that are there through the IDEA Act and how you've navigated that?
So I would say that we've done some with the IDEA Act, I'm not sure if we actually were focused on the IDEA Act versus focused on how do we make sure our websites are actually creating capability that the customers can find accessible, easy to use, and get whatever they need done in terms of a transaction completed. So I would say, to your question, I think that, call it the act, call it, the content, call it the data. I think all of those things are happening because that's the need that we have to communicate and better serve our constituents. So I'm not sure if the act is driving that, although it now puts sort of a timeline on it for us. Mm-hmm. But I think it's more along the lines of the customers are screaming for it. Mm-hmm. We've got people in our communities that, with gentrification going on across the world, across the US, you've got communities changing, you've got, people moving into communities where they need to have grocery stores, they need to have schools, they need to have churches. All of that is planning around housing in this country. And all of those things are happening with or without the IDEA Act, but they're happening because these customers really they need their information, they need it timely, and they need it effectively, and they need it accurately, right? So I think those things are driving it anyway. I'm glad to know the IDEA Act can help us push toward a timeline with outcomes, because now we have to do something by a certain deadline. But that's sort of how I see it. I think things are happening anyway, and those customers are pushing HUD and pushing the agencies to use modernized technologies. Anybody who has a smartphone, who actually is savvy on their computer, knows that there's ways to do things more efficiently. And if you've got to go and deal with an agency that's still dealing and you got to fill out this paper process and print it off and bring me a hard copy, you kind of lost them, right? Yeah. You kind of lost them. Does that answer your question?
It does. That was great. Thank you. So I guess going back to your point of culture and organizational change, what are the mechanisms that you're using to get insight that shows that this isn't something that we're doing because, obviously because there is the IDEA Act, but it's also, like you said, it's driven by what our constituents need. Mm-hmm. So how are you kind of utilizing some of the data to help drive that organizational change that the IDEA Act kind of sits alongside of, right?
So we have the secretary, I don't want to speak, for anyone at HUD, but I'll just say that many of our leaders across government are pushing toward more collaboration as best they can, based on different circumstances that are happening around us. But I think that collaboration has brought more integration within the agencies. Like before this terrible, the COVID thing hit us all, we were building a lot of sort of IPTs or integrated product teams to actually talk about certain issues or challenges we were having with being more effective or efficient with our customers. But that's been ongoing for quite some time. We've always tried to collaborate, but I think we are seeing certainly more of the business owners or the mission functional owners driving the change, because their constituents are beating them up. They're not beating up the IT guys so much. They're beating up, or gals, they're actually beating up the people on the mission side saying, hey, we need more efficiency. We need more data. We need more accessibility. And then they're coming back and saying, can you help us get there? And that's where these sort of integrated teams have helped open the dialogue quite a bit. And we've seen a cultural shift because of it. I actually see it myself. And I'm sure other agencies are doing the same thing.
Great. Thank you for that. I guess my next question is, what do you think, if you're making some predictions, what do you think is the evolution of the constituent experience for HUD? So obviously everyone has a smartphone. How do you think that they're going to be engaging with HUD, over the course of the next 24 months? Obviously COVID will impact that, but maybe some trends in terms of are they on apps more? Are they on conversational interfaces? Are they wanting more engagement through automated services like chatbots? So I guess what are your predictions in terms of how that experience is going to evolve and where they want to engage?
Well, I'm sure any technology or capability they're going to want to play with, right? Of course. But I would say that most agencies, not just HUD, and this is just me because I've been around and I've seen and I've worked in so many of them, but I'm sure they're all asking themselves now, how do we modernize? How do we move? Well, let me not use that word, the M word. Let me use the T word. How do we transform, right? How do we really transform the way we deliver our services now, or the way we used to before these situations occurred? And how do we really catapult ourselves into a more effective model? So I mean, if I had a checklist, I'd say, well, let's see, people aren't going to be in the office. It won't be as much interface in terms of collaboration face-to-face. What do I need to do to increase that? What do I need to do to increase the timeliness of delivery? Because now I'm not in the office. I can't push people to get to where they need to be. I need to do it through some digital medium so that I can ensure they're getting to where they need to be and the outcome happens when it's supposed to. So I think those are the kind of triggers that I think every agency is thinking about right now, or they should be, because those are the kind of things that are going to create work for our technology consultants and friends, but also a change in the way we deliver services, be it through a website, be it through a transaction via a website, be it whatever it is, thinking of the ways to do that in an effective way. Bots come to mind. I mean, AI, there's so many different ways we can do that through training. Training is such a huge component of all of this. We're going to have to retrain so many people, and we've got to build trust. I mentioned that earlier. If you don't have trust in this cultural change now, how are you going to trust that the 1,000 people that are working from home, the thousands of people working from home are actually doing their jobs every day, and that productivity increases versus diminishes. So I think those are the kind of things that, we all need to be thinking about to transform government. Truly, this is an opportunity to do that.
Oh, no, that's great. And I think, yeah, I think one of the themes that I keep hearing you talk about is this is a bigger transformation than a website, or this is a bigger transformation than, getting more content. This is a big organizational shift that is kind of going to set the foundation for what the engagement model looks like. And the engagement model includes the employee experience.
Yeah.
And if that isn't correct, then it's not going to translate for your customers. And so how do you think about both of those things, the experience both externally and internally, to encourage productive work, but also to encourage the experience that your customers see? And so I guess maybe changing gears a little bit to the experience your customers see, and maybe getting a little bit more tactical.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the Idea Act is, I'm sorry, part of the Idea Act is modernizing your website.
Mm-hmm.
And so for different people and different agencies, that can mean different things. And there are kind of some overarching themes. And while there are all these different channels, like the web and the mobile web is still often the primary place where constituents are engaging. So can you talk about what modernizing a website actually means to you and how you've thought about that? Because it seems simplistic, but there are many nuances to it.
There are, and that's an interesting question. So I don't know, I just think about, like, I remember, what was I think I was with the IRS, and we actually were, no, it wasn't the IRS, it was Treasury. And we were creating a website at that time, and it was many moons ago. But just thinking about how clunky it was, the clunkiness of information and how you put a big blocks of data and, all this detailed content, we would just put you to sleep and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But so I think that we have a lot of that still in government. And I think we have to find, just as if you were a commercial sector business owner, or a technology business company, when you're sharing your story or your data to get your customers in, there's a whole marketing strategy that goes into that. And there's a whole, how do we simplify the message but still hook you a little bit to get you to go deeper and to dive deeper into the content or the data. We have to think through that again. So it could be sort of a rekindling of our relationship with our customers to say, what do they really need to know? Is there an exercise we can do with them around what information is helpful to you? Little focus groups in the communities or anything like that, to say, okay, I want to simplify the message. I only want to know 3 things. I'm making this up, but let's say an agency only has 3 core missions. 3 core missions doesn't require 35,000 pages of content, right? So 3 core missions, you list each one, and there's a simple way where you can navigate to get the data you need. And the experience is beautiful. The customer gets what they want. They get to answer their question. If it's not there, you point them in the right direction and simplify that experience, as opposed to convoluting it with, here's a regulation about this, here's a regulation about that, the whole thing that we see sometimes. So your question's a good one, and I'm being a little flip about it. I hope you don't mind, but it's really just, we have to relook at everything, and we have to look more, not look less of a government agency, but simplifying our messages as if we're marketing to customers that we serve. We're not marketing to ourselves to talk about regulations and policies and things that we know that exists. That's government, the nature of government. But how do you simplify messages so your customer feels like, hey, I can go to them and I can get this done via a website, as opposed to having to worry about driving down into a brick and mortar solution to talk to someone with my mask on.
No,
Right?
that's great. Yeah, no, and I think one of the themes that I pulled out of what you were saying, Tarazia, is the user experience that goes into a site, and the importance of reevaluating that given the change in customer dynamics and the change in capabilities of websites to deliver different processes that maybe we couldn't deliver on before. I mean, before we had to have huge websites with all these pages because there weren't interactive forums at some point, right? So like, but now it can be much more streamlined, or maybe not the geolocation services that we need, or whatever it may be. So I think that's great feedback, because it always having that lens of how does a customer want to engage with us? How do we, and I loved your comment earlier of it can't take 20 clicks or whatever you said, it needs to take one to get them the information that they need.
Right.
And that a lot of that goes into UX. So I guess maybe I'll go on the other side of the spectrum. So we talked about a mature technology and kind of the website, or a mature digital channel on a website and a mobile site. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum, which is, what are some of the technology solutions that you're looking at or keeping an eye on that that you think can be really valuable to the constituent experience, that maybe have come up with certain lines of business, but that are, you know, as a digital leader, that you're making sure that you're tracking so you understand them and how they can be used?
So I'm just sort of a crazy believer in robotics process automation. And I think one of the big, and certainly blockchain is one of my faves too. And it's been interesting to watch that whole transformation or transition or whatever you want to call it. But I think that RPA is I think it's actually transformational in so many ways, because it will allow us, if we can open our aperture to see what the capability is, we can move toward more efficient ways of delivering our services, and really universal across government. So for example, every agency has a procurement function. If we actually leverage an RPA capability and look at the process by which procurement actions happen, just take one process flow, because there's probably thousands, but let's take one. If that one process flow or process workload flow could actually apply to 10 agencies, wouldn't it be nice if we could use that same capability across 10 and put the resources around those 10 to deliver a result? Talking about efficiencies, that would be phenomenal. So right now, everything is done sort of systematically by one agency, but if we could look holistically at some of these processes, there's so many that are duplicative. And there's so many opportunities to find efficiency in our workload, but our resource management, you know, around that. Within HUD, we've been looking at RPA for quite some time. We're using it. We had several pilots a couple of years ago, well, about a year ago, and we're now looking at how do we sort of instantiate that into how we do business, particularly for our support functions. GSA is also doing a lot around RPA. A lot of the agencies are exploring it. You know, no particular tool, but really a thought process in how we change the way we deliver services. So that's one that's big on my list. Of course, as I said, I'm a big believer in blockchain, but AI is at the top of the list. Training, you know, changing the entire training dynamic, where you don't have to have, again, brick and mortar, but also 1,000 trainers, where you can actually do your training in a virtual, more effective way. And that's just one example of how AI can leverage your resources. But all of those technologies are critical to our change and our transformation. I mean, we could talk about all of them for hours, I think, but I'll just throw out those few.
No, those are great. And I think that, I mean, there's some really great things for agencies to think about. Maybe one that I would add to that list, well, we could pick this up on another broadcast, is low code, because I think you also had talked about a lot of some of that has to deal with automation and solving problems through automation.
Yep.
The flip is low code, which is empowering folks who are non-technical to do more digital work.
Exactly.
And I think that that's something that can be a powerful combination. We've seen with, I'm sure that you've explored it. You only touched on a few, but it can be maybe a powerful complement to some of the things you mentioned as well. Absolutely. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that real quick or no.
No, so I agree wholeheartedly. And I just wanted to say that, you know, with our experience with RPA, one of the beautiful things we did is we allowed the customer to drive it. not the technology teams, because the customer actually sort of got their hands dirty with saying, okay, here are some processes that I want to move into more of an efficient productivity model. How do we do that? And then how do we leverage bots to do it? How do we, or not, but it was actually a dialogue driven by the business with IT as an enabler. And that's transformational to me.
Absolutely.
To your point. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know we're running low on time, so I'm going to try and squeeze in two more because your answers have been extremely valuable. So the first one is, how do you think about taking lessons or insights from the commercial world? And they aren't always an exact match, obviously, to the day-to-day that you live in. But is there any kind of process or way that you think about commercial insights and how they can be applied to the work that you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I am such a believer in having industry come in, and the Industry Advisory Council, which I'm sure you've all heard of, is such a critical component in our government. And sometimes it's not recognized for the great work it does. But there's been a group, just to give you an example, that's been working on blockchain. I've been on that group for now well over a year. A GSA-led group where we actually have various industry expert companies working alongside the government to figure out the right way to execute blockchain in multiple domains across government. That has been the most exciting, fruitful dialogue because you're getting perspectives from all over the place, technologists who own their little piece of the pie, but then others who are planners who are saying, what about this, what about that? That kind of dialogue, that kind of relationship, that's where real change happens. It's not going to happen of the 10 people sitting at their desks, again, there's the desk thing, the brick and mortar thing, but it's not going to happen from just doing that or having coffee at the coffee shop. You've got to actually get more integrated thought process in different perspectives, and really understand when a smart, capable technology comes into play and you've got a person sitting across from you that can share their excitement about the capability and share it with you, and you can begin to put the idea, there it is, idea in your head that it could work or you could change something. That's where change happens. And that's what's exciting about technology, and that's what's exciting about our government working closely with industry. They can't work without one another. I think it's got to be a complement across the board, across the board.
Amazing. Thank you for that. We are almost at our time. So I'll ask you one last question. Obviously, with your wealth of knowledge, do you have any parting thoughts for leaders within the government embarking on a digital transformation journey? I mean, you've given us so many insights, but I don't know. I want to give you the floor to give maybe your top 3 takeaways or something.
My top 3, me and Jay Leno. Let's see. Let's see. I would say that, for technologists across our government is to actually take this opportunity that we have in front of us, good or bad circumstances, but take this opportunity and think about how to improve customer service. How do you really sort of peel the onion back and say, there's some things I can do differently now that the circumstances have changed. How do I become more efficient? And how do I, really deliver the services my customers want? Second thing is, I would say plan. Actually use something like an enterprise architecture or something of that capability, to plan out how all the integration has to happen behind the curtain. Before you get the data in front of you on the device, what happens behind that to plan to get the right result? Measurable, accurate, timely data to that customer. That is so pivotal. And that's the value of true planning in EA to me. And I think it could really help our agencies quite a bit if we embrace it. The third thing I'd say is understand your culture. Understand the culture that you work in, understand what's important to them, understand how you bring them along so they can accept and then adopt the change. Because without them, you're nothing. Without them, you can't deliver a thing. And I think without, those 3 just pivot points, I think that can be a game changer for a lot of our agencies actually across government.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think that it looks like we're about at the end of our time. So I want to thank you.
You're welcome.
Razia. It was an amazing session learning from you, and thank you, our audience, for tuning in. The full webcast has been recorded, and you will receive a link to watch it again in your email inbox later this week. Keep an eye out and feel free to pass it along to your colleagues. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.